Story 1. I had heard about the FB Hotel from a friend who claimed it was the most luxurious hotel in the area. So, I decided to book a room for a weekend getaway. When I arrived, I was immediately impressed by the grandeur of the building. It was an imposing structure, with high ceilings and elegant decor. But something about the atmosphere felt off, like there was a heavy weight in the air. As I made my way to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hallway seemed endless, with doors stretching off into the distance on either side. But when I finally found my room, I was relieved to have a place to rest. But the relief was short-lived. As soon as I closed the door, I heard a faint whispering coming from the corner of the room. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sounded like a chant. I tried to ignore it and settled down for the night. But the whispering grew louder and more insistent. It seemed to be coming from behind the closet door. I opened the door and found nothing out of the ordinary. But when I turned around, I saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a woman, but her face was shrouded in darkness. I couldn't see her features, but I could feel her malevolent gaze on me. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The figure began to move towards me, and I could feel a cold chill run down my spine. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness, with only the sound of my own breathing to keep me company. When the lights came back on, the woman was gone. But something had changed in the room. The air felt heavier, and there was a foul smell in the air. I tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if I was trapped inside. Over the next few days, strange things continued to happen. I would hear footsteps in the hallway, even though there was no one there. Objects would move on their own, and the whispering continued. One night, I woke up to find the woman standing at the foot of my bed. This time, I could see her face. It was twisted in a grotesque expression, her eyes black pits of hate. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. The next morning, I found a note on the nightstand. "Get out of this hotel while you still can," it read. "You are not welcome here." I packed my bags and ran out of the hotel as fast as I could. As I looked back at the building, I saw the woman staring down at me from one of the windows. I never went back to the FB Hotel again. And I never forgot the feeling of terror that I experienced during my stay there. Story 2. The hotel stood tall and imposing against the dark sky, its windows reflecting the light of the moon. The surrounding trees rustled in the chilly wind, and the sound of their leaves echoed through the deserted street. It was a place where one could feel the weight of history, a place where every creak and groan of the old building seemed to hold a secret. Maggie had always been fascinated by old buildings, so when she heard about the hotel from a friend, she couldn't resist the urge to stay there. Despite its faded grandeur, the hotel had a certain charm that drew her in. When she checked in, the receptionist gave her a room key with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but she shrugged it off and made her way to her room. As she walked down the long hallway, she noticed how the wallpaper peeled off the walls, and the carpets were threadbare in places. She could hear the sound of her own footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. When Maggie finally reached her room, she pushed the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, and the curtains were drawn shut. Maggie pulled them open, and the moonlight spilled into the room. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, but she dismissed it as her imagination. She made herself comfortable, settling into the cozy armchair by the window, but she couldn't shake off the eerie feeling. It was as if someone was watching her from the shadows. As the night wore on, the sounds of the old hotel became more pronounced. She could hear the creaking of the floorboards, the rustling of curtains, and the faint whispers of voices that seemed to come from the walls. Maggie felt a chill run down her spine, and she tried to ignore it by focusing on a book. But then she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door, and the doorknob started to turn. She jumped up from the chair and rushed to the door, but when she opened it, no one was there. The hallway was empty, and the only sound she could hear was the soft patter of rain on the roof. Maggie went back to bed, but she couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was in the room with her. She turned off the lights, but the darkness only made things worse. The room was so quiet that every sound seemed amplified, and the creaks and groans of the old hotel filled her ears. She could hear the sound of something scratching on the door, and she felt her heart pounding in her chest. Maggie knew she had to get out of the room, but when she tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. It was as if it was stuck shut, and no matter how hard she pushed, it wouldn't open. Panic set in, and Maggie started to scream. She pounded on the walls, hoping that someone would hear her, but there was no response. She was trapped, alone, and terrified. Hours passed, and Maggie was still trapped in the room. The scratching on the door had stopped, but now she could hear something moving around in the room. She couldn't see anything in the darkness, but she could feel a presence, as if something was standing right next to her. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and Maggie could see a figure in the darkness. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, with long black hair cascading down her back. She was standing in the middle of the room, staring directly at me with her piercing black eyes. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The woman slowly started moving towards me, her gown flowing behind her like a river of white silk. As she got closer, I could see that her eyes were empty, as if there was nothing behind them. I was frozen with fear, unable to move as she reached out with her pale hand and touched my face. Her skin was icy cold, and I could feel her breath on my skin as she leaned in closer. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I could hear the sound of her laughter echoing through the darkness, and then she was gone. I was left standing in the darkness, my heart racing and my breath coming in short gasps. I knew then that I had to get out of the hotel as soon as possible. As I made my way down the hall, I heard strange noises coming from the rooms around me. Doors creaked open and shut on their own, and I could hear the sound of footsteps coming from empty rooms. When I finally reached the lobby, I saw the old man who had checked me in earlier. He was sitting behind the front desk, his eyes fixed on me with a look of terror. "Get out of here," he whispered. "You shouldn't have come here. None of us should have." I didn't need to be told twice. I ran out of the hotel and didn't stop until I was miles away. Years have passed since that night, but I've never forgotten the fear that gripped me in that haunted hotel. And I never will. Story 3. Deep in the heart of the Philippines lies an abandoned hotel, long forgotten by most. The Diplomat Hotel, as it was once called, was once a grand establishment, catering to the wealthy and influential. But as time passed, the hotel fell into disrepair, and rumors began to spread about the dark secrets that lay hidden within its walls. The stories spoke of the ghosts of former guests who had met their untimely demise at the hotel, their restless spirits haunting the halls and corridors. Some said that the ghosts of nuns, brutally murdered during the Japanese occupation of the Philippines, also roamed the halls, seeking revenge on their captors. Despite these tales, the Diplomat Hotel remained open for business for many years, until finally, it was abandoned, left to the mercy of the elements and the ghosts that haunted it. Years passed, and the hotel became a haven for thrill seekers and paranormal investigators, eager to explore its dark secrets. But as the number of visitors increased, so did the reports of strange happenings and eerie occurrences. One group of investigators claimed to have witnessed the ghostly apparition of a nun, her face twisted in agony and rage. Another group reported hearing the sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls, even though there were no children present. Despite these terrifying accounts, some visitors remained skeptical, believing that the stories were merely the product of an overactive imagination. But then, one night, a group of tourists checked into the hotel, hoping to explore its haunted history. What they found was beyond their wildest nightmares. As they entered the lobby, they were greeted by an icy wind that seemed to chill them to the bone. The air was thick with the smell of rot and decay, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, stained with blood. As they climbed the stairs to their rooms, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them, even though no one was there. When they turned around, they saw the ghostly figure of a nun, her face twisted in fury. The group ran to their rooms and locked the doors, hoping to escape the terror that awaited them outside. But the ghosts were not deterred, and soon they began to pound on the doors, their howls of rage and pain filling the air. The group huddled together, praying for the nightmare to end. But it was only just beginning. In the hours that followed, the group was tormented by the ghosts of the Diplomat Hotel. They saw apparitions of former guests, their bodies twisted and mangled in death. They heard the sounds of children crying, their sobs echoing through the empty halls. And then, as the night wore on, they began to hear a new sound, a sound that filled them with a sense of dread and terror. It was the sound of chanting, of voices raised in unison, speaking a language that they could not understand. As the chanting grew louder, the walls began to shake, and the air grew thick with an otherworldly energy. The group knew that they had to get out, to escape before it was too late. They ran to the lobby, only to find the doors barred shut, sealed by some unknown force. They tried to break them down, to force them open, but to no avail. As the chanting grew louder still, the group began to feel their sanity slipping away. They saw images of the past, of the horrors and atrocities that had occurred within the walls of the Diplomat Hotel. Ghostly apparitions appeared before them, moaning and screaming in agony. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the temperature dropped to an icy chill. The group stumbled upon a locked room, which they soon discovered to be the source of the malevolent presence in the hotel. As they pushed the door open, they were greeted by a ghastly sight. The walls were covered in blood and human remains, and in the center of the room stood a demonic entity, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. The entity let out a deafening roar and lunged at the group, causing them to scatter in terror. They ran through the hotel, trying to escape the wrath of the demon, but it seemed to be always one step ahead of them. Finally, the group found themselves back in the lobby, where they saw a figure in a hooded robe standing in front of them. The figure spoke in a guttural voice, warning them to leave the hotel and never return, or suffer the consequences. The group quickly left the hotel, but the horrors they witnessed that night would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They never spoke of their experience to anyone, fearing that no one would believe them. Years later, the Diplomat Hotel was demolished, and a new building was erected in its place. But rumors persisted that the malevolent presence that once haunted the hotel still lingered in the area, waiting to claim its next victim. The site remained abandoned, a ghostly reminder of the atrocities that had occurred within its walls. Story 4. As soon as I stepped inside the Hotel Morty, I felt a chill run down my spine. The old, decrepit building seemed to loom over me, its windows dark and foreboding. But I had no choice. It was the only place to stay in this god-forsaken town. The lobby was empty, save for the clerk behind the counter. He was an old man with a wrinkled face and sunken eyes. When I asked for a room, he gave me a sly smile and handed me a key. "Room 13, he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's our finest accommodation. I took the key and headed up the creaky staircase. The air was thick with the scent of mold and mildew. When I reached the door to room 13, I hesitated for a moment. But I needed a place to sleep, so I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with only a single lamp casting a weak glow. The furniture was old and worn, the curtains stained and tattered. But what really caught my attention was the painting on the wall. It was a portrait of a woman with long, flowing hair and a hauntingly beautiful face. But there was something off about her eyes. They seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and settled down on the bed. But as I drifted off to sleep, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. I jolted awake, my heart pounding in my chest. But the room was silent. I tried to calm myself down and went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to find the painting on the wall had changed. The woman's eyes were now closed, as if in peaceful repose. But her expression was still hauntingly beautiful. I shook my head and told myself it was just my imagination. But over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Every night, I would hear faint whispers in my ear. And every morning, the painting on the wall would have changed. The woman's expression grew sadder with each passing day. I tried to leave the hotel, but every time I went to the door, it wouldn't budge. It was as if I was trapped inside. Then, one night, I woke up to find the woman from the painting standing at the foot of my bed. Her eyes were open now, and they seemed to bore into my soul. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. The next morning, I found a note on the nightstand. "Get out of this hotel while you still can," it read. "You are not welcome here." I packed my bags and ran out of the hotel as fast as I could. As I looked back at the building, I saw the woman from the painting staring down at me from one of the windows. I never went back to the Hotel Morty again. And I never forgot the feeling of terror that I experienced during my stay there. That I experienced during my stay there.